In other words, our old record shows that every year you bring in, let's say, 500 mm depths of water. Now, if one event comes in 2 hours, bring in 600 mm, then we have a problem, because the system was not designed for that. And the system was designed based on the older data, which did not have the current climate effects considered.
Since 1980, the global economy has tripled in size and the world population has increased by 30%. In 1950, about 15% of the Earth's land surface was covered by rainforest. Today, more than half has already gone up in smoke. In fewer than 50 years, more than half of the world's tropical rainforests have fallen victim to fire and the chainsaw.
I can never prove that sea level will rise a meter or 2 meters in 100 years. But the weight of the evidence now is becoming greater and greater that in fact we're going to see significant changes in sea level. Then with the beginning of the burning of fossil fuels, beginning of industrialization, much more utilization of carbon-based resources, things start picking up. So by the time I was born, sea level was rising at about 1 millimeter per year. Now sea level is rising on a global average at about 2.8 millimeters per year. So it's already picking up.
Even with this realization, it's sad to learn how painful it is for nations to agree on a new legally binding climate treaty to cut down carbon emissions. Both the industrialized and developing nations remain at loggerheads as to who should bear the burden of stopping global warming for fear that it might harm their economic growth. China has insisted that the United States should reduce emissions by 40% over 10 years, while many American lawmakers insist that China commit to binding emission caps now. Sadly, nobody is prepared to give in.
It's a classic problem of what we would call the prisoner's dilemma, which is that you always want the other person to do more. Because cutting down greenhouse gas emissions, whether it be from burning fossil fuels or deforestation or methane, the costs are borne by the country that cuts down the emissions, whereas the benefits are global. So in economic terminology, one would call it a global public good. So everybody wants it, but nobody wants to pay for it.
Countries have belief systems. America thinks that it will always be the superpower. America thinks that resources are unlimited. The average voter doesn't see it as a huge problem. And so what if the world heats up by a degree centigrade? So what if it heats up by 4 degrees centigrade on average? More air conditioning, it'll work. So I think there's great resistance by people to think that something truly unique could happen in the course of their generation.
For the Copenhagen meeting on climate change to succeed, leaders have to agree to make ambitious global cuts. Some developing nations have fiercely resisted this on the basis that the rich countries created a problem by pumping the atmosphere with greenhouse gases and should take their sole responsibility for cleaning up themselves.
Well, nobody wants to give anything up first. Nobody wants to make the concessions first because if the developing world makes concessions equal to the developed world, they'll never get ahead. They'll never be developed. If the developed world gives concessions because it's burnt most of the carbon over the last century, then it gives an unfair economic advantage to the developing countries. So it all makes it's very rational, makes a lot of sense if you're myopic.
Countries such as United States, where the per capita carbon dioxide emissions is something like 20 times that of an average Indian, or maybe 15 times that of an average Chinese, or maybe about 6 times that of an average Chinese. Countries such as that do not want to give up their way of life, do not want to give up their profligate ways of using energy, and they fear that their economies would be hurt if they cut back on emissions, particularly the United States. Whereas countries in the South that are energy poor, for example, in India, 56% of the rural population still does not have access to electricity. So countries such as India need to grow their energy. So countries such as India, China, other developing countries would argue that they have legitimate needs for development.
While both the developed and developing nations argue about their legitimate rights to develop and prosper, nobody is going to lend a sympathetic ear to the sufferings of Mother Nature. Has the battle to combat the problem of climate change been lost, or is there a glimmer of hope that things will get better?
Here's two people, developing world, developed world, and they're in a car and they're having a heated debate and they're going, no, let me steer, no, let me steer, no, let me steer, no, let me steer, let me be in control, let me be in control. And next thing you know, boom, they run into a brick wall because they haven't been paying attention.
Modernity, progress and affluence, these are the universal dream for many societies today. But in our desire for rapid urbanization and industrialization, we have lost sight of the fact that we do have a role to play in saving the earth from destruction. There's been so much that we have taken from the earth's finite resources, but too little has been put back to ensure its sustainability. But I feel somewhat relieved when I see individuals taking the lead instead of waiting for leaders to decide on a global action to fight climate change. I've met an entrepreneur, 57-year-old Bradley Gardner, who founded Green Asia, a company which provides green solutions to help minimize the impacts of climate change. His interest came after he developed a piece of land in Bali back in 2002 called Begawan Giri, using essentially recycled materials.
During that time, I also realized what this world was coming to. There's a lot of taking, there's not a lot of putting back. For example, building. Most of the building was all done with recycled wood. I sent out purchasers into Java and we found a buried forest. That buried forest, we were unearthing 7-meter long timbers, 140 in diameter, and that wood was aged at over 150 years. So there was a policy not to cut down trees. We planted over 2,500 trees on this project, so it was very important to us that we had to look at environmental ways of not cutting down trees. So using all recycled wood was one of those.
Mr. Gardner feels that in the absence of an international binding agreement, there's still room for individuals to play to effect change.
It's called the voluntary market. So it allows people to engage in this market without having government tell you what to do. So it's following the Kyoto Protocol, but it is a voluntary market. So any reduction in fossil fuels is going to help overall. If everybody tomorrow said, I am going to be responsible for my impact on climate change, it would have a huge difference worldwide.
Every cloud has a silver lining. When all hope seemed lost, a fresh initiative is underway to alter the past failed treaty on climate change. At the recent Commonwealth meeting, leaders reached a crucial climate change consensus that has set foundations to reaching a strongest outcome of the meeting in Copenhagen. The challenge now is to put the statement of intent into a binding agreement. The last that we need is for the good intention to suddenly fall apart due to the reluctance of the big industrial powers to agree or ratify the agreement. It all depends on the future generations to make the leap forward, because as the earth grows weaker, the louder will the calls be for nations to immediately put out the problem which has been smouldering for decades. The only question is, will it be too late?
I believe that there is a hope that we will come good. But I have a greater faith in the next generation of leaders, because they are coming through, they are appreciating a broader set of issues, and they have a better understanding of the importance of environmental stewardship.